Imagine bleeding continuously for 5 days in a forest filled with predators that can smell a drop of blood from a mile away. No pads, no running water, no painkillers, and absolutely no locked doors. For a modern woman, this sounds like the setup of a survival horror movie. But for 99% of human history, this wasn't a crisis. It was just another Tuesday. Modern society has built an invisible multi-billion-dollar infrastructure to insulate the human body from its own biological realities. Pharmacies, plumbing, and private rooms shield us from the messy friction of existence. But human physiology hasn't changed. The women who walked the earth 30,000 years ago possessed the exact same reproductive system, the exact same nerve endings, and the exact same cramping pain as women do today. Yet, they didn't just survive this monthly biological tax in the absolute wild, they thrived. And the way they managed it completely shatters everything you think you know about prehistoric life. Let us start with what we know for certain. Today, a modern woman will experience roughly 400 periods over her lifetime. That is nearly 10 years of continuous bleeding. But if you take a time machine back 30,000 years, the biological math radically changes. Anthropologists who study modern hunter-gatherer societies, like the Dogon people of Mali or the Kung of the Kalahari, discovered something fascinating. Prehistoric women did not menstruate every month. In fact, an ancient woman might have experienced as few as 50 periods in her entire life. Why? Because the prehistoric body was in a constant, relentless state of survival. First, ancient women reached puberty much later due to lower body fat and extreme physical exertion. Once they reached adulthood, they spent the vast majority of their reproductive years either pregnant or intensely breastfeeding. And here is a crucial biological mechanism. Constant. Around the clock, breastfeeding acts as a natural pause button, halting the menstrual cycle entirely, a process called lactational amenorrhea. Furthermore, during brutal winters when calories were dangerously scarce, the human body would simply shut down reproductive functions to save vital energy. Menstruation was not a monthly curse. It was a rare, occasional event. But when it did happen, how did they manage the bleeding without attracting a pack of hungry dire wolves? How did they prevent lethal bacterial infections without sterile cotton? The answer was found in the dirt. Archaeological evidence and indigenous history reveal that ancient humans were absolute masters of environmental engineering. They actively foraged for highly absorbent, naturally antiseptic materials. Sphagnum moss, dry grasses, and specifically cured animal hides were gathered and packed into rudimentary leather undergarments. This moss was not just a prehistoric sponge, it naturally lowered pH levels, killing bacteria and preventing deadly infections in the wild. But preventing infection was only half the battle. What about the predators lurking just beyond the tree line? To survive, they had to become invisible to the highly sensitive noses of apex carnivores. They achieved this through meticulous waste management. Soiled moss was never just tossed aside. It was either buried deep in the earth far from the camp or completely incinerated in the white, hot ash of the communal fire. Furthermore, the constant heavy wood smoke from these fires permeated their clothing and hair, effectively masking the metallic scent of blood and hiding them in plain sight. And what about the excruciating pelvic cramps? Without a heating pad or a bottle of ibuprofen, how did they endure the pain while hiking 15 miles a day? They utilized the world's oldest pharmacy. To soothe muscle spasms, they pressed heavy, fire-heated river stones against their lower abdomens. And for the pain, they stripped the bark from specific willow trees and chewed it. Willow bark contains salicin, the exact same active chemical precursor found in modern aspirin. Long before pharmacies existed, they were treating their menstrual cramps with prehistoric painkillers. But the most profound difference between their reality and yours is not about pain or hygiene. It is about the psychology. In modern society, menstruation is heavily stigmatized and deeply hidden. Women are expected to absorb the pain, show up to a 40-hour work week, and pretend their biology simply does not exist. You are trained to hide discreet packages in your sleeve and whisper when asking a friend for a pad. But for 99% of human history, in a world without walls or closed doors, there were no secrets. Menstruation was not a dirty, unspeakable taboo. It was a communal reality. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies often find evidence of specific gathering spaces for menstruating women. For decades, early historians assumed these were places of exile or punishment, but later research revealed the exact opposite. These spaces were sanctuaries. When an ancient woman bled, the relentless pressure of survival was temporarily lifted. She was not forced to march, hunt, or gather heavy firewood. The rest of the tribe absorbed her share of the labor. She rested, she bonded with other women, and she stepped away from the exhausting demands of prehistoric life. It was not a punishment. It was a mandated break from productivity. So what did they actually do in these sanctuaries all day? They did not just sit in silence. This downtime was the prehistoric equivalent of a cultural classroom. Away from the exhausting demands of the hunt, older women passed down vital survival knowledge to the younger girls. They spent hours weaving complex baskets, crafting delicate tools, and sharing the oral histories of their ancestors. They groomed each other, they laughed, they slept deeply without the anxiety of keeping watch, and they forged the unbreakable social bonds that kept their tribes alive. Then, roughly 10,000 years ago, humans invented agriculture. We built fences, established ownership, and created the concept of labor. The daily workload exploded. Suddenly, taking time off to rest became a liability to the economic system. But the agricultural trap was not just economic, it was deeply biological. As humans stopped foraging and started farming, their diets shifted dramatically to heavily processed carbohydrates and grains. This sudden influx of sugar and carbs caused a drastic increase in body fat. Biologically, higher body fat triggers earlier puberty. Suddenly, young girls were reaching adulthood years faster than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. Combined with a more sedentary lifestyle, the number of periods a woman experienced skyrocketed from a mere 50 to hundreds over her lifetime. The natural biological rhythms of the human body were no longer compatible with the rigid, unending schedule of farming and commerce. Menstruation was rebranded from a normal biological fact into an inconvenience, a weakness, a secret to be hidden. Today, you have running water, modern medicine, and synthetic polymers. You have every physical comfort our ancestors could never even dream of. Yet, you are forced to chemically numb your body just to survive an 8-hour shift in a system that refuses to acknowledge your biology. Our ancient ancestors had none of those comforts. They managed their bleeding in the dirt, surrounded by predators, in the raw, freezing wild. But they did not have to hide. They did not have to apologize. They were allowed to rest. We sanitized the process. But we lost the freedom to just be human.